This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Catherine and I are going to dissect a brief excerpt from a work by Barry Lopez. So this is from Desert Notes, River Notes by Barry Lopez, and the short story is called The Log Jam. I'm just going to read about a page of it. We are also putting a picture of the text up in the show notes at storyworkspodcast.com. So if you want to read along, feel free. And then we're going to do a little writerly dissection of Barry Lopez's brilliant prose. The Log Jam, 1946. In September, when bearberry leaves were ready to pick, after the first storm had come up valley like a drunken miner headed home, snapping limbs as thick as your arms off the maples, Olin Sanders caught a big tree barber chairing and was dead before they could get him out of the woods. They laid him across the laps of two men in the back of the truck and sent word ahead. When they got down to the road, his wife was there crying, with pink curlers like pine cones in her hair, and in black knit slacks too small for her stout legs, and a loose-hanging white blouse, and two county sheriffs, drawn by the word of death, wearing clean, pressed clothing like clerks. When she looked in through the window of the truck and saw him broken in half like a buckled tin can, she raised her fist to beat at the thing responsible and began beating the truck. When the sheriff held her back and said in a polite voice, "Now, control yourself," she began beating her thighs. One of the men stepped up and punched the sheriff. All this time, the son, in whose lap the father's broken head was cradled, sat silent. He was aware of the beginning of something else, more than his father's end. His pants were wet with his father's blood. The night the boy left the house, walked past his father's shirts hanging to dry on the line, and drove up the Warner Creek Road to the place where they had been cutting. He sidestepped down slope with the chainsaw in his hands to reach the stump of the tree. The blood congealed like dark sap on the wood, and cut it off. Cut off the top of the stump with the stain of his father's death on it, the saw screaming in the dim night. With the choker and a length of cable, he hauled the butt round uphill and cursed and jacked it into the back of his pickup. He came off Warner Mountain to the Granite Creek Road and went down Granite Creek until he came to the equipment shed, where a logging bridge crossed the river to the highway side. With a front loader and a length of chain, he yanked the slab of wood out of the pickup, drove out onto the bridge, and with jerking motions and the hiss of hydraulics, he twisted the machine crosswise, tipped the bucket, and dumped the slab of fur into the river. He put the front loader away and drove home. No one had ever done anything like this before. The lack of any tradition in it bothered the boy. As he walked past the trees near the house, he was suddenly afraid. His mother was awake, sitting in the darkened living room when he walked in, wearing the tattered quilt robe that embarrassed him when his friends were around. Behind the glow of her cigarette, she asked where he had been. The butt round came back to the surface of the river, the thunderous sound of its plunge evaporating in the night, and it moved off like a dark iceberg riding low in the water. A few miles, and it beached quietly on the cobbles of an island. All right, that's from The Log Jam by Barry Lopez. So, anything jump out at you, Catherine? Any?
I will say the very first thing I noticed, which isn't even, I don't know, like I guess it's just the first thing I noticed, was how long and complicated his sentences are. Like there's a lot going on in each and every one of them, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, but they're clear. A lot of sentences, whether my own or someone's I'm editing, when I see a long one, the first thing I check for is clarity. Okay, it's long. Is it correct? Right. Okay, it's correct, but is it going to lose the reader?
Yeah. I mean, that whole first sentence, in September, when bearberry leaves were ready to pick, after the first storm had come up valley like a drunken miner headed home, snapping limbs as thick as your arm off the maples, Allen Sanders caught a big tree barber chairing and was dead before they could get him out of the woods. Like, that's a long sentence, and it has a lot in it. It gives you not only the time, but a storm, the fact that this guy died, but because I mean, it's just like crazy what all he packed into that one sentence. And like you said, it's clear. And there's multiple of those like that.
There are. And that sentence has 4 commas, which is important. If I see a sentence that a writer has in a manuscript, even if it's correct without commas, you can get into trouble when you aren't punctuating.
Right.
It's not just, oh, take a breath here. It's now I'm setting off a clause. There's something here being set apart from something else. So you need those commas for the clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah. The voice of this stands out to me. It's a very straightforward sounding piece, but there's a flavor to it. It's not emotional. It's not trying to like jack us up on grief. It's very simple and straightforward in terms of describing the action, but it evokes a sense of a certain place and a certain people, the people who belong to that place, saying that the pink curlers like pine cones.
Yeah. You get a definite sense of these people. It is interesting that the narrator here there's no person that we get attached to. I mean, even the son, we aren't in his head, right? We just watch him go out into the woods and cut the tree and dump it and then go back, right? But there's no like internal anything on any of these people. You're all left to like experience that just as an observer.
Yeah, no, you're right. The mother looks in at the father and starts beating the truck, and we get, she raised her fist to beat at the thing responsible and began beating the truck. So, there's like a little peak of interiority in the beating at the thing responsible. And then the son felt he was suddenly afraid. Yeah.
And he was aware of the beginning of something else more than his father's end. But it's very like omniscient, like a commentary on what is going on rather than a like actual like interior moment with the character, because we don't really get her emotion. She raised her fist to beat at the thing responsible. Yeah, that's what she did,
Yes. Yeah. It's an omniscient distant third, it can, this narrator, it doesn't just follow these 2 characters, but also follows the background, the, piece of the tree that the son, I guess not really a boy, chucked into the river.
Yeah. I do love at the end of the first paragraph when it says one of the men stepped up and punched the sheriff. Like, that was unexpected. I just didn't expect that. So when it happened, it kind of made me giggle. I was like, oh, good for him. But it also shows that, because you think, she's beating the truck. The son's sitting in the back, although you don't know that yet. And the sheriff says, now control yourself. But then the man steps up and punches the sheriff, means that they're okay with her emotional outburst. Like, they understand it and they want her to be able to express that, right? They're not mad at her for being emotional that her husband just died.
Yes. Yeah. And to me, that speaks of a loyalty of community, that these men, the loggers, are probably incredibly stoic people who would never let their emotions come out in that way. But by punching the sheriff, we see their loyalty not only to the dead man, but to the wife and to the son. And that this sheriff, even though he might be part of their larger community, he isn't one of them. He doesn't get it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a brilliant moment how in just that one sentence, so much meaning is made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One unexpected sentence.
Yes. Which is brilliant.
And it's short because the sentences up until that point are compound. They have multiple clauses, right? And then all of a sudden, just boom, one of the men stepped up and punched the sheriff. So it hits you in the same way that it kind of hits in the story.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we don't need to know which man. We don't need to get a name. The only name we have is Olin Sanders, the man who, was killed by the tree. Mm-hmm. The lack of character description of, personality and personification being given to these characters is part of what keeps us in that distant point of view, but it's no less effective. It's less emotional, but it's not less effective on us as a reader.
And you get the emotion, like I'm on the second page here, the top, it says, where he's cutting the wood and he says the saw screaming in the dim night and then with a choker. And I know that the choker is a tool, but screaming and choker placed like that close together immediately gave me a sense of wailing and being choked up, the grief in the moment, even though it's not related to the son, if that makes sense. Like the word choice itself gives you that emotion without it being the son feeling that being told to you. It's just the words themselves.
Did you miss the live creative writing workshops I held this fall? If so, don't worry. They are still available as pre-recorded, self-directed workshops at StoryWorksFiction.com. You can get writing backstory into your now story, weaving together character, plot, and theme, and making your readers fear and fear for your characters today. Each 3-hour writing workshop includes examples, discussion, exercises, and you benefit from the students who did attend live, their questions, my answers, the group discussion. Give yourself a writing treat. Sign up today at StoryWorksFiction.com. Yes. Yeah, and in that same paragraph, he offsets in parentheses, the blood congealed like dark sap on the wood. We're getting this visual impression of the scene, the scene of death, of the father's demise, and we aren't seeing it through the son's eyes. The narrator is pointing it out to us, and those parentheses do something. They sort of pull me out of the moment with the son and his actions to remind me, this is why we're here. This mark was made.
Right. And it's the stump of the tree. So it's demarcating the tree. And then you get the parenthetical. It's like, and this is how we know it's the tree because the blood is congealed, right? But the son doesn't need that. We need that. Right. We need to see the blood being congealed there. Because if he was in the truck with his dad, he may have even been there when it happened. Which, so he knew exactly where the tree was.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That whole paragraph has a violence to it. You're talking about screaming and choker, and he hauled and cursed and jacked.
Punchy language,
right? And
not wonder, what is he going to do with this? Like, what? He's got a big old piece of wood now, and he's cut. Like, what is he going to
do? Yes, yeah. And these sentences are not short, and they are not fragmented. These are these are full, complete sentences, but they're still packing the emotional punch. Sorry, I don't have a non-cliche for saying that right just now. Yeah.
Well, they're packing, like you said, that violence, because being a lumberjack or working with trees like this is a violent thing to do in the first place. You're wielding very sharp implements. You're dealing with things that can kill you very easily, as obviously in the first paragraph. But yeah, so it's interesting that the violence kind of echoed. We have violence in the first paragraph, and then you have violence again here with the saw. You get to see the physical action of cutting a tree, which you don't get when he dies.
Right. Which is interesting too, because the story starts after the father's death. The story is all about the aftermath. So we get that long sentence with lots of clauses that tells us Olin Sanders caught a big tree barber chairing and was dead before they could get him out of the woods. And then we move forward from there. So we don't need to see the accident itself.
No. And probably would have been too much if we'd seen the accident itself. This doesn't feel like, the story itself doesn't feel like it's trying to get you to be in that moment, and to experience that tragedy. It's trying to give you the tragedy from a different perspective.
Yeah. I mean, for me, this is really about grief. The mother and the son, in this moment. It's such a very short moment. And if we saw the accident, there would be some awe maybe of the tree falling, some, upset over Olin Sanders, but that's not where Lopez wants us to reside.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that we're residing in that grief, right? And he so underplays it in that second to last paragraph when the son comes back. His mother was awake, sitting in the darkened living room when he walked in. Like, no kidding, she was awake. She's like, oh. And she just says, she asked where he had been. I very much doubt that it came out, where have you been? Very calm and polite. So it's just it's so understated, but you can feel the undercurrents without it having to be on the page. You don't have to see him walk home to be her being either devastated or scared out of her mind or, anything like that. She's sitting there wearing the robe that embarrasses him. That's what he notices.
I love that.
And then she asks, where have you been?
Yes. And that's such a great specific detail, the tattered quilt robe that embarrassed him when his friends were around. And it places the son at just that age where he's old enough to be in the forest working with his father, with the men, maybe he's handling chainsaws, maybe not, maybe he's in an assistant position, although he does cut off the stump. So he certainly knows how to use these trees. So he's old enough to be out there working, but he's still young enough that he's embarrassed by his mother's robe, doesn't want anyone to see that piece of their life.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. His age isn't mentioned because like you were saying earlier, like, he's the boy. Is he a boy? Is, like his age is just given to you in these glimpses, right? So he's out with his dad, right? So he's old enough to work. He's holding his dad's head in his lap when his dad's being trucked down the mountain, but then they do refer to him as the boy, the boy, the boy, the boy. So he clearly doesn't want you to think of him as a grown man. He's still living with his mother. Something integral is going to shift because his father is dead now, but it doesn't feel like it's like it feels like different than if your kid was young, right? And the father dies, and all of a sudden, especially like, what is it, 1946? That's a big deal.
Right.
The house dies. So it's interesting that he doesn't place that age, but you understand kind of by the end where this boy sits relative to manhood and taking care. Now he has to take care of his own mom and that sort of a thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely that shift is a coming of age moment for him. Yeah. The lack of any tradition in what the boy has done is another thing I love about the story. It's one of those sentences that grabs me because it does surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels so right as well, that there should be something you do like this, some next step or some, I don't know.
Right. Like in your grief, especially, it's that idea of what can I do? What can I do? What can, to make it, you have that idea of to make it better or to make it better for myself even. Right. And yeah, like there is no, what do I do with this tree? But he also created his own tradition. And by marking it as it didn't feel like there was enough tradition in it. Like, but there's ceremony in that, even though he didn't feel it.
Yeah. Well, and he does it all alone. He does it without community. The men who brought his father home then went home to their families, and he and his mother are left alone. And I think for him, it was pushing against helplessness. Yeah.
Definitely. You can feel that.
Yeah. What do you think about watching the butt round float down the river like a dark iceberg riding low in the water and then beaching?
Makes me feel like, so I kind of want to like read the rest of the story because I kind of wonder if it's going to show back up again. Because it's like that idea of, you don't mention the gun unless the gun's going to go off.
Yeah.
Like, why are we following the butt round down the river and finding out where it beaches unless it's more significant? But I mean, I guess it could not be. You've probably read the whole story, so
right. Yes.
Does it reappear?
Well, it's not Cujo. It's not going to come back and kill more people.
What? Oh, no, I'm just disappointed. I thought this was a horror story.
Oh, dang it. No, so he goes forward in time. So the next section is 1951, and then a maple limb drifts downriver and rests near a log round on which dark stains are still visible. And, so it goes forward through time, and each of these flash pieces that make this short story end with something drifting downriver and then creating a log jam. Hence,
cool.
Hence our title, the log jam.
Yeah, there you go. See, so yeah, there is a significance and like knowing that, like going back to that, it's like, okay, all of this grief is piling up, right? It doesn't just disappear. And that's kind of cool. Like the symbolism of the log round as grief or as, stuckness in some form. I don't know if all of them are about grief, but of something that is sticking with you, right? Some emotion, greater thing that doesn't just disappear. I think it's so easy and kind of trite and flippant to say, you'll get over it, or time,
right?
And here he's cut the log off and he's thrown it into the river. Well, that doesn't mean it's gone,
Right.
And
right.
That's kind of a cool, yeah. I'm glad that you said that because now it like makes more sense in the overall. Yeah, that's cool. Like
yeah, but I love
motif, but without the. Yeah.
Right. And I love what you said though, because even if the story ended there, if it was just that piece, what you said about the grief not disappearing and everything not being made all better just because, you cut down the tree or something is so true. And so we do follow the piece of the tree downriver and it doesn't drift off to the ocean. It doesn't disappear. It gets stuck on a sandbar, and that's its own metaphor, and then it's up to the reader to make meaning of it. Does it mean that grief doesn't disappear? Does it mean that, I don't know, things get stuck in us?
That's what we want though.
Right?
We want the reader to be left with this feeling of, oh, okay. Now I have to think about that. Do I have a log jam?
Don't we all? Good Lord.
I only have one log jam. Maybe that's a better.
Yeah. How many things have piled up on my sandbar?
Exactly. Have I made a beaver dam? Am I collecting them? But no, that's really cool. And I think the best short stories like this really do leave you with that. It's not ambiguous, right? It's not an ambiguous ending of the little vignette, but it's almost ambiguous, right? Because you don't really know the meaning of it until you've gotten through the whole set, if that makes sense. Like you explaining the set and how things are creating a logjam makes it make sense. But individually, it's just that tiniest bit ambiguous and making you think like, oh, okay, now I have a round. Now what do I do with it?
Yeah. Well, and I think the best end notes are the ones that make meaning for the reader without telling the reader what that meaning is, so you do go away and it's still resonating with you. It's still in your consciousness and you're like thinking about that butt round on the sandbar or that. Here, I'll read the final paragraph of the whole story, which goes through, I think, to 1976. The crown of the tree eventually washed downriver and became entangled at the tip of the island. In the years that followed, a pair of osprey came and built a nest and lived as well as could be expected in that country.
Aw.
Yeah. I mean, I like that because you get the sense of change. Decades have passed, so the sandbar has been eroded and become a little island. And then you've got that log jam there, that buildup of debris now at the crown of a tree. And then you have new life, the osprey. And they build a nest, so they probably have some young, lay some eggs, but lived as well as could be expected in that country. The very end of the story leaves me with this, but it's not all roses. It's not all... It's still a hard life. It's still a hard place to be in, and things still happen, which is a really nice kind of bittersweet takeaway.
Well, and you can kind of like back that into this story too. Like, and the boy went home and his mom said, "Where have you been?" And they lived as well as could be expected.
Yeah.
You don't need that, but you kind of understand it, right? That they're going to move on to the best of their ability and they're going to live as best as they can in this new reality. So that's it's poignant though. It's bittersweet, but it's poignant. So,
it is.
Yeah,
definitely.
Cool.
Yeah. So there you go. Desert Notes, River Notes by Barry Lopez, a really beautiful little collection that I turned to many times over the years. So
yeah, well, and it's fun to look at a piece like this and we dug into it really deep, but even just on an initial reading, like you can get a lot out of it without having to like deep dive, but it's kind of fun to get into it and really pick it apart.
It is.
Ooh, why is this working for me? Why is this working as well as it does? So
definitely. Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.